for those of you who are joining us on YouTube. I am very, very excited to come to you today. And I wanted to just take a moment to kind of work through what we have learned thus far. Yes, a recap, but a very necessary one. But before I do, the magnitude of the ramifications of this message, not only in my own life, but in the lives of my congregation and in your life as well, depending on how you respond to it, you need to know is it's big. And I don't want to like false advertise and say, oh yeah, well, this is going to be really exciting and really big and epic in your life. And then at the end of this thing, you say, well, that's all it was, right? Well, yes, but that doesn't necessarily mean that simple isn't complex, because we are dealing with a very powerful entity. So at the beginning of this thing, I need to say that when I began this journey, I want to make some things clear. When I bowed down before what I understood at that time to be my God, and I accepted what it meant to be in a relationship per se with him, my words were simple. They said, I need you to be real in my life, and I need my service to you to be real. I do not want to be fake. I also added in there, if I have to get on my knees again, it's going to be a shotgun in my mouth. Now, the reason why I tell you this is because I need you to understand at the core of everything that I do are those words, okay? Now, don't get me wrong, I'm still human. I make lots of mistakes, do foolish things, whatever, right? But it is imperative for you to understand that I don't need to be right about everything I've taught you for the past cycle's teachings. Now, I want to show you something really quick, just to kind of put things in perspective here. Let's see, how am I going to do this? We're going to go here. Let me navigate to this real quick. You'll understand why here in a minute. Okay, here we go. You see that? November 2nd of 2024 is Cycles Part 1. I want you to understand that this has been a very long teaching and has been a long time coming. But I want you to know that I received the revelation in all of about 3 seconds. I was up at a campground. I was not intentionally camping. I actually was there for a reason, to pick up stuff that we had abandoned because of a very intense freak storm that had come upon us. And we decided it would be safer to move out away from it. And I had my cooler sitting in front of the campfire, and I was at the end of a very exhausting emotional day in which I was asking questions of my creator, what was true, and whether I was worthy of the things that I was doing, etc., etc. Every human being has their existential moment, and I had mine. So I sat down on my cooler, and the smoke from the campfire that was going one way began to pour over me. And as it poured over me, there was a moment in time in which there was a panic inside me because I just didn't need to deal with the smoke in my face and the burning eyes and the choking and the trying to shield myself away from the campfire, shield myself away from the smoke. And there was just kind of this moment where the smoke poured up over me and I could still breathe. And my eyes didn't burn. And the first thing that came into my mind was Yeshua walking on water. In that moment, I thought to myself, well, maybe the rules of smoke don't apply right now. And in that moment, all of a sudden, the cycle's teaching came to me. And I could tell you, there were plenty of campfire time after that where the smoke did choke me, where the smoke did burn my eyes. But in that moment, it didn't. And the way I understand that is that there's a system. There's a system of information and a system of feedback, and there's a system of rules that exist. And if you play by those rules, then you live by those rules. And I'm not trying to create an anarchy per se. That's definitely not it. But I can tell you that the rules actually don't apply. And I'm going to explain to you why and how. So the first thing that I want you to understand is that in my beginnings, when I called upon who I'm going to call at this moment the Lord, and when I tried to communicate with God, at those moments, what I understood is what was. And what I mean by that is that, guys, I didn't start as a rabbi, and I definitely didn't start as a Torah observant, and I didn't start with the name Yeshua and Yahweh. I started with Lord and Jesus Christ. Now, the reason why that's important is because, first of all, you need to understand that what I'm about to do today is about that foundation, okay? So a couple things that I want you to think about. I say, I need you to be real in my life. In other words, if you exist, you need to prove it. And not only that, but you need to ongoing be authentic. In other words, not some question as to whether it's true or not. Okay? And then there is the context of a very important concept. And when I say context, what I mean is it's contained within a sphere of a circle of influence of information. That when I did those things, it's not that I was ignorant, it's that I had not learned yet. And the reason I say that is because America's definition of ignorance today has taken on a very different soul. And what you're going to find out is that when we talk about information and feedback loops, and we talk about a system, you need to understand that that system itself has developed its own rules and expectations for you. Okay? So I call upon the creator of the universe, whom at the time I called God, not Elohim, who I called Lord and not Yahweh, because of my learnings and understandings that were given to me by the teachers of the Bible. The reason I bring this up is because that is exactly what we are going to address today. And I'm gonna bring this around full circle. there's a couple things that are very, very important. The first thing you need to know is when I said I need my service to you to be real, you need to know that I do not prepare messages. I've told you that before, but what you don't understand is that if I have a question, for example, let's say that I have a question about physics, but I know that my message is about that certain physics, I will not watch any YouTubes, will not read any books, will not try to prove what is coming to my mind. That's a very scary thing, because now I stand up here and teach that day without any input. And the reason I do that is because I said I need my service to you to be real. Okay? I believe that this message that I am about to give you is important enough that I need to surrender and make sure that that's true. But before I do, I want to explain something to you. I'm coming to you today with a voice that's a little bit cracky. And I had to make a decision this morning as to whether or not I was going to preach this message. And the reason why is because the shortness of breath and also the crackiness is from a very massive sinus infection that I've had for the last 2 weeks. And I lost my voice. That's how important I believe this message is. I believed that it could not be delayed any longer. And I believe that it is imperative enough that I go ahead and say this, okay? So in this way, I want you to know that everything that I've taught you until now has been a newness in my life. And so I want to go back to the foundation of everything. And the reason I want to do that is because I believe that after this surrender, what comes out of my mouth is going to be so extraordinary that it's going to shock me. Now, those are some bold claims, and I realize that. And I know it sounds relatively egoist, right, to speak this way. But I have definitely come to some conclusions in the last 2 weeks that I did not have in the week that I was going to finish this message. So first and foremost, understand that I am not regressing. What I am doing is I am eliminating myself from the equation, okay? So I'm going to start with praying. Lord God, Father, come before you. And I thank you for everything that you have done up until this moment. All the blessings that you have given me, all the lessons that I have learned, and all of the truths that I have been shown. If somewhere along the way I have found favor in your sight, I pray that this day that you would cover me with your grace and mercy. And in that process, I want to make sure that I say that if there's a time in this where I have been out on this limb, dancing on it, and it has not broken, and there's a time where I have caused offense to you in either practice, word, or thought, I humbly repent and stand back from this moment, even at the cost of the loss of everything that I understand thus far. Because I definitely did not want to ever deviate from who you are, who I am, and who we are together. And for the sake of that, I pray this prayer in the fashion in which I prayed it in the beginning. And so as I move forward into this message today, I surrender to the possibility that I have been wrong. But if I have been right, I pray you give me the boldness. You give me the words. You give me the standard and the understanding to accomplish this journey with you. I ask all these things in the name of Jesus Christ, my Savior and Lord. Amen. Now, for some of you, that may have been offensive, but for me, I need to make sure, because of what I'm about to tell you, what I have had confirmation after confirmation, what I have experienced, what I have encountered with this cycle's teaching and everything with it. I want to make sure that Q is out of the way. I want to make sure that Kinatavnu bin Racham is in order. And I want to make sure that I am in a state in which not only can I receive this message, and you can receive this message, but because of the openness that I'm willing to have and because of the openness you're willing to have, that it will change your life forever. And so now, as we begin this journey, I think it's very important that we do a little bit of recap. The first thing that I want to do is I want to explain to you that the cycle's teaching may have sounded like it was about the Sabbath. I've shown you circa septane rhythms that are 7-day cycles of process within a human being, within plants, within other things that are cyclical. There is a return to that moment every week, okay? If you start on a Wednesday, it will end on a Wednesday. If you start on a Sunday, it will end on a Sunday. Does that mean that that's the day you're supposed to have your Sabbath? No. And I will tell you why. Because two very important things. Number one, when Yahweh chose the day at the beginning of time, it's important for you to understand that that's what he reiterated by raining a double portion of manna on the sixth day. Now, we could get into all kinds of arguments about what that means, and we have the loony solar people who say, oh, it starts on the 1st and goes to the 7th and the 14th and the 21st and the 28th, and that's just logical because it's not synced up with the rest of the system around you. The only problem is that you have no proof that the manna fell on the 6th day and that was a Wednesday. What we have is an ancient people carrying forward tradition in the fear of God, right? That's important here. Carrying forward the tradition in the fear of God. That is absolutely folklore. Folklore how? Folklore to the extent that we just have to trust that when they came out of Babylon, Saturday or Saturn's Day, which was the day they were choosing to be idle on and continued through the Mishnaic period, into the Talmudic period, into the modern period of Judaism, keeping that same day for fear of God. Now, it's very important in that aspect that we accept that puts it on Saturday. Let's see if we have some proof. How about the Council of Laodicea in 336 AD? One of the decisions made during that time was if any Christian is caught being idle on the 7th day like the Jews are, they will have no absolution. What is the 7th day? Saturday, during the Council of Laodicea, establishing that if you rested on the Saturday, you would have no absolution. You would not be saved. So ignore that anti-Semitism and ignore that heresy. And let's go with the idea that even the Christian church accepted the calendar process of Saturday as being the Sabbath and Sunday being the Anno Domini, not Anno Domini, I can't remember it now, but basically the dominant day of the Lord. That's what it was. It was something like that. Domingo in Spanish, right? Domingo in Spanish. So we have a Circa Septane with a folklore that says that Circa Septane begins and ends on Saturday. Well, then we have the commandment of Yom Kippur. The commandment of Yom Kippur says a day begins at sundown and ends at sundown. Now we could get in all kind of weird stuff like, what does it mean, the evening and the morning, the first day? But what we can do is we can establish that a day for the calculation of the Shemitah and a day for the calculation of the Jubilees has to do with what? Sundown to sundown. Now, why is that important? That's important because the aspect here is that there is a limitation to our understanding in that we begin a day when the sun comes up. Not so for the intensification of all power in the universe, who communicated to us that we reckon our Jubilee on Yom Kippur. And the commandment for Yom Kippur says that an evening and not an evening and morning, an evening to evening is actually the beginning and end of a day. Now, where this comes important is when we start to get into the idea that the Sabbath, as we understand it, is from sundown Friday night, when the double portion would have fallen. After you collect a double portion and as the sun's going down, time to cease. And then what? Then the next day you eat that double portion on Saturday. And then at twilight, when there are 3 stars visible in the sky, the Shabbat has ended at the, I think it's nautical twilight, I think it's called. Anyways, that's the Sabbath. We have a rhythm in us that is built into that information, but there's so much more here. And the reason I say this is because what I have discovered is that the Sabbath is foundational to the beginning. When Yahweh began my journey in Torah observance, he began it by telling me to keep the Sabbath on the day that I was trying to keep the Sabbath. I had cleaned up Sunday. Remember, I had football, NASCAR, and one other thing, I can't remember, it was PlayStation on that list, right, of things I did on Sunday, after church, before church, etc. Maybe during church, because one of the games or races ended up in conflicting. And so I'm going to tighten it up. I'm going to get rid of football. That's a sacrifice for me. And I'm going to get rid of NASCAR. That's definitely a sacrifice for me because I was a huge Tony Stewart fan. And then, of course, PlayStation, which, I mean, come on, this is a no-brainer for any of you who ever played PlayStation. I was PlayStation 5. I was playing PlayStation 2. Anyways. So, the important thing here is going to come as you begin to realize that the Sabbath is just a foundation of that. So I'm in the middle of cleaning up my act, right? And I'm starting to study. I'm gonna come home from church, right? Church. And I'm going to, because I've been sitting in the pew on Sunday morning listening to the pulpit tell me how to live my life as a Christian and how to believe about my God and how to reject the things that were about to happen, right? So here comes this voice telling me on Sunday as I'm trying to study the Bible, hey, I'm busy studying the Bible on the Sabbath. What's the matter with you? Leave me alone, right? asserting itself. The Sabbath was asserting itself, which means what? I was not Lord of the Sabbath. And that's going to become very important today. Notice that the name of this message is actually authority part 2. Principle of authority is very powerful. Very, very powerful. But the premise is that we have now what? Sundown to sundown from Friday to Saturday. Stop all the other stuff because it's either anti-Semitic or heretical, and just allow that to be your reality and watch what happens. Okay? As soon as the sun falls down on Friday night, you're done. As soon as the sun falls down on Saturday night, do whatever you want. Right? But take that moment. Let that moment occur. Let that moment be what it is. Okay? Now, the next thing is it says we cease. We cease from what? We cease from the processes of being malkah, which means to be an agent or an owner of a business and negotiate. Or what? Avodah, which is what? Slavery. Or better yet, let's do it a different way, service. It can be indentured service. It can be hired service. Indentured service was big because we don't really see it today. You can get in debt with the credit card company. The worst that's going to happen is maybe at the end of that whole mess, you either are going to have paid it off somehow or you have entered into bankruptcy. But what you don't have to do is go work the dude's farm, the CEO's farm of the owner of the credit card company. Well, back in Yeshua's time and going back to Abraham's time, that was a very real thing, that you had to work off your debt. You couldn't just blow it off. Okay? So now we have what? We have the Sabbath from sundown to sundown on Saturday, done. Circa heptane rhythm, done. Now we have this thing, this plausibility that we've established that since Yahweh rested the first time on that first 7-day cycle, that he actually does so every 7 days. And then we were able to say, if that's plausible, then we can accept that that means that he's doing something very specific on those days. And this thing that he says is he sanctifies and blesses it. So if you fall into synchronization with that, you are falling into synchronization with the divine. There is something about the idea that we go around our weeks separate from each other in a weird sort of way. That literally he's doing his work, we're doing our work, and somehow all of a sudden we meet here. And that's special. And that's intercourse. Okay? And I want you to understand that the synchronization of that is very powerful. Well, then we get into some crazy stuff because what do we have? We have this man was not made for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath for man. So now all of a sudden it becomes a force of benefit. This also is a recap. It becomes a force of benefit that really, literally, actually activates prosperity and health and other things mechanized into the Sabbath, into your life. Because you can take just that one commandment, apply it to Deuteronomy 28, 1 through 14, and although like kind attracts like kind, you're resting your body, you're resting the stresses of the week, you're ceasing from that drive and that need to believe that you are producing the income in your life. Now, I can tell you, however we work this out, the short version is that's not true. Now, I know that Paul said, if a man doesn't work, he should not eat, right? And I know that the curse upon the ground, which he lifted after the flood, was that by the sweat of your brow, you'll eat your bread. But what you need to understand is that doesn't necessarily carry over to you're the one earning or making the money. In fact, in all reality, that doesn't exist. Your provision has always and will always come from the intensification of all power in the universe. It is part of his mechanism of benevolence. Now, our rejection of that comes in the form of violating the Sabbath. You want to step into a realm of provision from the intensification of all power in the universe. You need to step into the realm of 6 days you shall work, and in the seventh you shall rest. Because he's working during those 6 days and resting on the seventh, plausibly. Okay, so now we have talked about, in our last message, we talked about authority as being existent as the result of subordination in operation of obedience. In other words, the only thing that's actually occurring is there's some sort of information coming in, there's a response to that information, and that information proves that there's an authority in the first place. So if there's a commandment for Sabbath, then there is a Lord of the Sabbath. And if there's a commandment to cease and rest, then there's a Lord of ceasing and resting. Now, Lord is a horrible word to put here, but it's the best I can do to say that there is an authority that actually mechanizes the commandments of the Sabbath. Okay? Now, whether that be an angel or whether that be whatever, what we do know is that Yeshua makes a very interesting statement. He says, the Sabbath is not made, or I'm sorry, man is not made for the Sabbath. But the Sabbath is made for man. Okay, so now we come to a very interesting statement. Therefore, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Okay? Therefore, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Well, here's the interesting thing about that. The Son of Man is not Yeshua as a Messiah, but instead is a son of Adam. In fact, if you go back to Ezekiel, where Yahweh refers to Ezekiel as Son of Man, he says, Son of Man, shall these dry bones live? And of course, some people say that he wasn't addressing Ezekiel, he was addressing someone else. But Ezekiel responds, Lord, you know, right? You're the one who knows the answer to this question, not me. But he called him Son of Man. So, in principle, as he calls him Son of Man, there is a very important thing that's happening. It's removing that designation as that being some sort of important thing about the Messiah. So now we come back to the gospel, right? And here's Yeshua saying, therefore, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Well, what's a Son of Man? A Son of Man is a son of Adam. So let's go back to Adam's gospel. Let's go back to Adam's Torah. What was it? Well, predating the tree, we have the instruction to be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth, subdue it, and have dominion over it. So a son of Adam inherits those instructions from Adam. And a son of Adam has the inheritance of those instructions, which is what? Be fruitful and multiply, subdue the earth or replenish the earth, and what? Have dominion over it. Well, there's all kinds of physical and philosophical things that we can get involved in with this. But there's something very important that you need to realize, and that is, and this is kind of one of those moments where if you want, you can just turn off the video after this, because this is actually the only thing you really actually need to know. If you are given instruction to do something by the intensification of all power in the universe, you're enabled. But now I have to prove that, right? So let's say that we take the first commandment given to man and woman, right? So if we go back to in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 and 27, we are dealing with a very different entity, right? If we go to Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, and we encounter the Adam of that moment, there's still no woman. And it's not until we get into Genesis chapter 2, verses 21 through, say, 25, that we actually encounter a woman. But Genesis chapter 2, verse 24, I believe it is, says, "Therefore shall a man leave his mother and father, be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." Okay, so the first important thing here is that there are elements of this commandment. What are they? Leaving something, joining to something, and becoming something, right? So if we go to the leaving part, therefore shall a man leave his mother and father. Now, there is something very important about that information. A man leaving his mother and father is a very difficult thing in the sense that he is leaving the family inheritance, he is leaving the family business, he is leaving the covering of his household to what? To become his own authority and therefore be a law unto himself. A law, as in a Torah, unto himself. Romans chapter 2, verses 13 and 14. So now, the reason why this is so important is because what we have here is a question. If God commanded that man to go do that thing, is he going to be successful? That's the question. Is he going to be successful? Well, one could argue that it's his choice, right? However, it's a commandment. And I'm going to put in there that Yahweh claims through Paul in well, okay, I was going to say that Yahweh claims through Paul that he won't give us more than we can handle, but the truth is that that is a Christian misnomer. And although there is an underlying truth of that in Torah, okay, there is an actual truth of that in Torah. There is a context or an idea here that it's not necessarily said he won't give you more than you can handle. But what is said is that you should not say that it is too hard for you. That's in Deuteronomy chapter 30, where Moses says, I call heaven and earth as a witness. He says, don't say that it's too hard for you and that it's too far away for you to, understand. But instead, what you should do is realize that it is near to your heart. It is near to you and written upon your heart. Okay? So there are two very important elements that we need to necessarily get into. So the first one, and this is an important one, is a concept of that if you are commanded to do it, then you are able to do it. Okay? So when we get into the Sabbath, scary things happen. When I am dealing with the Sabbath, one of the things that I am dealing with is letting go. That I am literally allowing all of the things that have been pressing upon this brain to not exist. At first, it was hard. I would check my bank account. I would check and see if maybe I, got a contract, or I would, say that I was going to go ahead and maybe work, a little bit, like maybe towards the end of the day or something like that. But in all reality, and this is important, I was lying to myself. Because if the intensification of all power in the universe has the ability to withdraw itself from creating and rest, well, that's not the word that's used because he doesn't really need rest, and cease. And in that process, basically, bless and sanctify that day, then I should be able to too, right? People are like, oh man, you have no idea. I get off on Friday night and I know that tomorrow I need to mow the lawn. Tomorrow I need to take the trash to the recycling. Tomorrow I need to take the kids to, the amusement park or whatever. Now you're saying that I'm losing that day? I have a friend who can't stand it. He cannot deal with the fact that he would lose that day. But what he doesn't understand is that he would be gaining that day. You gain the day. You don't lose the day. You gain it. For 6 days you shall work. What happens? On Sunday morning at 8 o'clock in the morning, guess what? I'm clocking in. I'm clocking in hours. I'm working with whatever contracts. I'm doing my designs, all that kind of stuff. Now, let me tell you what I'm not doing. I'm not resting. And it can be exhausting, especially when Shabbat is my busiest day. But the truth is that I am in sync with Shabbat because of the fact that this is the day that we are commanded to have a mikra, which is what? A holy convocation, a coming together and a reading out loud of Torah, or a speaking out loud of Torah, I should say. And of course, in Acts chapter 15, verse 21, it says, for, might want to find out what for means, because that means therefore, right? And then you want to find out what that's there for, right? Okay, that was pretty cliche from old Bible days, or Bible school days. But the premise is that for, which is usually dia, I think. I think it's dia in the Greek. From ancient times, Moses has been taught in the synagogue on the Sabbath. So we know that the tradition at the time of the book of Acts was that the congregations were meeting on the Shabbat and discussing or reading or speaking Torah. Okay. The reason I say that is because the word mikra doubles as the concept to cry out. And so there's the concept of speaking Torah out. Okay. Then the final thing we learned is that all of the feast days contain Sabbaths of some sort, holy convocations, and ceasings from works, which means what? The Sabbath is tied into the feast days. So now all of a sudden the feast days become a focal point of understanding that there is actually a force of benefit tied into the feast days, which are consequently tied into what? They're tied into the first and seventh month and a 50-day period between the first month and the seventh month. The three pilgrimage feasts, remember, Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles. Okay. So now what we need to do is we need to say, okay, I think we have beat the Sabbath as a dead horse to the extent that we possibly can. Or have we? Because one of the things you need to realize is that when we go back to Genesis chapter 1, verse 14, something very important is happening. And that something very important is happening is that there are signs, seasons, days, and years. And we know that when Jeremiah is sitting in the rubble of Jerusalem after it had been ransacked by Nebuchadnezzar, he writes the book of Lamentations, and in it he says, now the land shall enjoy its Sabbaths. Now there are two very important things that you need to hear from that. Number one is that the Sabbath of the land is the 7-year Shemitah, the 7-year rollover and fallowing of the land. And the 6th year, you'll have a bumper crop. You'll eat that bumper crop into the 7th, but you will not plant until the 8th, which means you will not reap until the 9th. Oh my gosh, if you understood the importance of this, but I will tell you, the science behind it is magnificent. The return of the mycorrhiza into the soil, the fungi, the bacteria, the microbiome that builds back into the soil when plants are allowed to just fall to the ground and rot it's imperative to good soil. We won't get too much into that, except that he says, now the land shall now enjoy its Sabbath. Well, here's what I want you to think about. If the land wasn't enjoying its Sabbath and the Shemitah wasn't being counted, then what was not happening? Jubilee. Okay? Jubilee. Why is that important? Because Jubilee was when what? All land was returned to its rightful owner and all loans were canceled. Okay? In the 7th year, slaves would go free, and technically there was kind of a release of prisoners under all of that. But then there was this concept of the 50th year being the big release, okay? But the only way to calculate the 50th year is if you've been counting the sevens. You count 7 sevens and then 1 year, and that's the Jubilee, which consequently happens on Yom Kippur, which means what? It happens at evening, sundown, of that day to sundown of that day is when Jubilee occurs. So we know that Israel was in violation of the release. And if they were in violation of the release, reciprocation says that they themselves would not be released. And they weren't for 70 years or thereabouts. Daniel prays a prayer because 70 years passed and they're still in exile. Okay. Now, what's really important here is for you to understand that this is telling us something. This is telling us that if the cycles are not honored, there will be a pollution in the land and the land will spew you out. That's important, okay? But there's more to this. And that is that when Yeshua said, therefore the Sabbath was made for man, you need to know that means that every single last cycle that exists actually exists on your behalf, and that includes the nidah, which consequently is Hebrew for menstrual period. Which means that we need to look at things differently. We need to start realizing that every cycle that exists is made for man. Summer and winter, or what we would call the cold and the heat, the harvest and the seed time, which we would call fall, spring, right? Are promised from the rainbow. Oh man, if you knew about the rainbow. the crazy fact that a that a water droplet has to be exactly 42.5 degrees to the angle of incidence of light in order for a rainbow to occur is absolutely amazing. I'll show you later. Okay. Now, this is important. Remember when I taught the message in the cycles teaching about habit or ceremony, where humans tend towards something specific. You can go into anthropology or archaeology, and you can go to the Mayans, you can go to the Chinese, you can go to the Egyptians, and you will find the same philosophies, the same rituals, the same pantheon, and the same initiations occurring with ceremony. Why is that? Where does that come from? What is that? Excuse me. Where is that that disintegration of our minds? Because the pattern is there. Why are they all practicing this same thing across the globe? Now, one could argue that, okay, well, they were all scattered from Babylon, and there was a very specific practice in Babylon, and that's a good theory. But I'm going to tell you something. We have Pythagoras discovering harmony, right? We have Kepler discovering heliocentricity. We have Einstein discovering photons, winning a Nobel Prize for it. But I want you to hear what I just said. Discovering. Do you understand? They took the time to observe and realize that something was there that we didn't know was there. But does it mean that that's when it started? No. And since that's true, we need to accept that if the Sabbath was made for man, if the cycle of the 7 days, circa septane process, was made for man, then so were the feast days, and so were the solar revolutions, and so are the lunar revolutions, and so are the other things that I'm going to show you here in a minute. And the reason this becomes so imperative is because we need to get back to the enabling part. Because what you're going to find is that these cycles are actually tools. And what you're going to find is that a lot of different cultures knew this. And we have forgotten it. And we are so misaligned with it that we have actually created counter frequencies to those cycles. Okay? All right. So the first thing that I want to do is explain to you that Paul mentions a hermetic principle in his teachings. Now, people say, well, what's a hermetic principle? Well, let's not worry about that per se. But there's a hermetic principle called correspondence, which basically says what you see in front of you is actually a message about what you can't see from a higher energy or a higher entity trying to give you instruction. Okay. So if I say, look at a flower that has petals, and I am able to identify something very important about that flower, that obviously we look to Yeshua when he speaks about the lily, right? The lily of the valley, I believe it is. And the way that he's doing this is he's explaining, take now thought for what you shall wear, because look at the lily of the valley Solomon in all of his glory was not adorned like one of these. So how much more important are you? And remember, another recap of the cycle's teaching is that if you were given the instruction, you are valuable. Remember that you are worthy. If you were given the instruction, then you are worthy to do it. And he made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God. He literally set up the principle or the action as being something that you can't make yourself worthy of. And if we accept that he's the lamb slain from the foundations of the earth, and we accept that when time, which is an illusion for us, began, that the principle of he made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God, existed for Adam, for Noah. In fact, Abimelech, right, takes Sarah into his household. This is something that's always blown my mind. Who's Abimelech? King of Gerar. What's Gerar? The Philistines. Right? The Philistines. Remember that uncircumcised Philistine that David threw a rock into and said, "Why do you defy the God of Israel?" Yeah, that group. Abimelech addresses the intensification of all power in the universe. How we know? Because God goes to him in a dream. It flat out says that this happened in Torah. If you believe your Bible, listen to this. He goes to him in a dream and says, "You're a dead man." And he says, "What did I do wrong?" And then, of course, he says, "Because you have that man's wife. She's married." And he's like, "Well, this is crazy." And of course, I'm gonna cough and choke during this moment. I have my own theories about why that is, by the way. But anyways, he says, "Will you destroy a righteous nation for one man's sin?" He just called his nation righteous to God. Called the Philistines righteous. There is no other standard of righteousness. He made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God. There is no other standard of righteousness. So somehow this uncircumcised Philistine knew enough when he was addressing the intensification of all power in the universe to say, "Would you destroy a righteous nation?" In other words, I put myself under that rule, under that system. I align with that system. Did it stay that way? No. The Philistines ended up taking becoming an infestation and then an oppression and then a possession of Israel, to the extent that the Israelites couldn't even have weapons, to the extent that they would take the actual Ark of the Covenant. No other nation in the history of mankind had the gall to take the Ark of the Covenant from Israel, but the Philistines. So yeah, they're a mess. But what does that tell us? That tells us that this pre-applied, this theology of he made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God, pre-applied. And if we were found worthy, then we are valuable. And if we are valuable, then we are capable. And if we are capable, then we are able. And if we are able, that means we're enabled. And you're going to see this. Okay, so now here is the part that's important. Cycles have a beginning and an end. And if we calculate that from 0 to 360, which is actually 0 again, then we actually have an oscillation. And an oscillation is Hertzian. Now, let me explain what I mean. one oscillation of a cycle over time in a 1 second period is 1 hertz. Okay? Now, something really beautiful and amazing happens. And I'm so excited because I've always been obsessed with lightning. I've always had my moments of excitement with lightning, of when there's a storm, I'm not afraid of it. I go to it. Like I will go outside and sit on the porch while it's storming. I love to do that. And I could tell you what I didn't know is that lightning striking all over the world has created a sound. What do I mean by that? Well, short version, everything in the universe, and this is not my words, owes its existence solely to sound. Now, I propose to you that if that's true, then we should be able to find evidence of that in everything. Well, of course, Tesla says, if you want to know, you need to think of the universe in terms of frequency, vibration, and energy. Well, I have news for you. All energy is the movement of something, right? Or the potential for movement of something. And we're going to get into that today. So the short version is what do I need to prove to you? I need to prove to you that if you have been given an instruction, no matter how extraneous, how magnitudinal it is in comparison to your reality, how much it seems astronomically impossible, something exists already present in your reality that has not only given you the power, the resources, but the authority. And we're going to get to that, okay? So now we have this thing where the land spews Israel out of it, spews the Jews out of it. Why? Because they were not honoring the cycles. How is it that when we get into the book of Kings, we arrive at Hezekiah, and Hezekiah somehow discovers Torah? What? Israel is God's nation. They were given Torah. So how is it that a king, an Israelite king, all of a sudden discovers Torah? And when he does, he says, uh-oh, we're supposed to be doing something right now. Why? Because he went and got his astrologers and said, hey, what do we got here? We got the moon at this time. We got the barley at this time. Oh, okay. It's Sukkot. We are supposed to be celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles right now. And boom, off they go. And here's the crazy, or I'm sorry, not the Feast of Tabernacles, Passover, right? And what happens? The priests come to him and say, people are eating the food unclean. It says you can't do that. Do you know what Hezekiah, just like Abimelech, says, I know the system. Are we supposed to be eating unclean? No, it says that right in there. Don't eat unclean. If you have unclean hands, you wait until the second Passover, right? And so there's this whole ritual washing time, which Yeshua participates in when he washes the feet of the disciples during that time period. You say, oh, no, that was after dinner. Okay, fine. But it's still a practice of washing during Passover. But the principle is that basically the way that it goes is he defaults to Abimelech's attitude. May the good Lord pardon. In other words, I believe that there is a system out there that says that we did the best we could. But isn't it insane that that's what we see? We see Israelite kings coming along and saying, oh, we were supposed to do that? Our bad. Right? That's not how this is supposed to work. The instruction that's given is given as a result of a belief that you can carry it out. And if you could carry it out, then that means that you're enabled. But that also means that you are an authority over it. And like I said, we'll get to that. Okay, so now we know that the land spewed the people out. So it wasn't just Shemitah. It wasn't just Jubilees. It was the feast days. And plausibly, the Sabbaths. Why? Because in Ezekiel chapter 22, it says the priests have done violence to my law and that they don't teach my people the Sabbaths. The priests have done violence to my law. I don't want to be on the side of that instrument or mechanism of vengeance from Torah. I mean, from Yahweh. Okay. Now, we need to shift gears a little bit. So we understand that the signs, the seasons, the years and days are important, and that the whole mechanism of the sky is a mechanism of information telling us something about that moment, but also telling us something about when and how we are supposed to be in sync with it. Okay. So in that sense, it's important to understand that that means that there are cycles and processes. Now, I'm going to take a journey for those of you who are nerds real quick and say that if you multiply the golden ratio, which is 1.618, to the formula of music, okay, which kind of has to do with some word things that we're going to get into in a minute. But the premise is that it comes out at around 440 hertz for A on a keyboard. Now you say, why is all that information important? Because that has to do with something called octaves. Okay? So 1.618 times 49, which is what? 7 Shemitahs or 7 Sabbaths, which is what we count in order to get to Jubilee and in order to get to Pentecost. And I'll remind you, Pentecost is the betrothal. Pentecost is the moment when the groom gives the bride the covenant and the bride decides whether she wants to drink the cup or not. And if she drinks the cup, she accepts the terms of the covenant. And then he goes and prepares a place for her until what? Until the fall feast. We'll get to that at another time. Now, here's parts important. 49, the 49th octave, which is basically when we just do exponential functions of something. For example, if I say 2 times 2, that's 2 squared. If I say 2 times 2 times 2, that's 8. That's 8, or that's 2 cubed, right? So the way that I want you to think about this is that 1.618, which is the golden ratio, which we'll talk about in a minute, times 49 gives us 440, close to 440 hertz. Now, the reason why this is important is because the concert pitch tuning of today of instruments is based upon the A440. In other words, when a concert, when a group of orchestral participants tunes their instruments, they tune to the A440. In fact, all music today is tuned to the A440. Now, I won't get into why that could be erroneous, but what I will say is that it is a form of something that we're going to get into, which I'm just going to simply call the cycle of the curse. Okay? But what we need to get into first is the concept that all that's going on is the oscillation is being doubled. Okay? So let's go back to what's our definition of a hertz. So if I have 440 hertz, what I have is I have an oscillation, which is a full revolution of the circle over a 1 second period. That's how your chronograph works. Okay, there's an oscillation that occurs, and that oscillation then causes your time to move to the next time. In fact, that's how a computer thinks, because one oscillation equals one instruction. And so if I'm going in gigahertz, which is basically what we have today, we also have terahertz, which is basically millions of millions of millions, then I want you to think about how fast a computer can think. If it's processing one instruction at a time, and that is now happening in gigahertz, right? Then we're having really, really fast thinking going on by a computer. But there's still a little clock in there firing in the 1 second interval, a high and low voltage that's causing your computer to pull in instruction, your cell phone to pull in instructions. Now it's going really, really, really fast. But what I want you to think about is that what if the importance was not how fast we could go, but how slow things are actually going? The reason I bring this up is because what I want to propose to you is that if there are octaves of a number, then there are sub-octaves of a number. So now let's talk a minute about, say, the cycle of the sun. Generally speaking, it's 364.599, I think. In other words, it's almost 365 days. And so we rounded it up to 365 days, and we just kind of lose a little bit here and there, and so that's why we have the leap years. But the premise is that technically speaking, our calendar, as we understand it here in America, is 365 days. So that's a 1 year cycle. Okay, so in terms of human development, and in terms of understanding of human maturity, we have identified that 18 cycles of the sun makes a human being sufficient enough to what? To try to keep that first commandment, so to speak. That's when they can leave their mother and father. Now, there's an exception, which is the emancipation, which comes at 16 revolutions of the sun. I can't tell you how inaccurate that is and when it comes to the maturity of a human being, and I've seen it demonstrated right in front of my very eyes when it comes to people thinking that they're mature when they're not, because of their age. Okay? Now, the reason why I want to bring this up is because what I want you to think about is how many seconds are actually in a year, okay? Now, we don't need to calculate that. I just want you to think about that for a moment. So we have 60 seconds in a minute. We have 60 minutes in an hour, and 23 point something hours in a day, which we also rounded to 24. Never fixed that leap thing, but we kind of do with the leap day, or the leap year, sorry. But the premise is that now we have 365 of those seconds, okay? Like I say, you don't need to do the math. I just want you to think about how big that number is. That's how much slower the oscillation is of that cycle. Let's move it to something a little bit more general. Say the moon phases. We have a 28.59 lunar cycle, which gives us kind of a close estimate of when the new moon is going to come. But the premise is, and I think it's actually more accurate than that, like they actually have a calculator that's figured out exactly when the moon is going to appear. But the premise is, and this is important, that 28 days is how long it takes for that cycle to go all the way around. That's a lot less than a hertz, isn't it? Well, the reason I bring this up is because somewhere along the lines, we need to understand that there is a vibration involved in that process. It's just so minute, we can't feel it. So then we need to ask questions, very important questions. Question number one, if the sun, or if the earth revolving around the sun takes 365 days, and that's actually a hertz, but it is a very, 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 very low tone. It's still tone. And if it's tone, and there's a countertone of some sort, that's a beat. And if that's a beat, and we have varying tones based upon different oscillations, then we have music. And so something very, very powerful just happened. And that is that everywhere around us is music. The trees growing, the flower petals coming out are actually coming out at a certain beat, at a certain rhythm. And what's really crazy is that what you'll find is that the energy behind all of that is actually music. Remember, everything in the universe owes its existence solely to sound. Now, the reason why this is so important is because what I want you to realize is that there's a song playing. You see, and the other thing I want you to realize is that there is actually, and this is amazing, a song from the heart, a beat, right? And a song from the breath, a pulmonary movement, and a song from the brain. Our brain waves are actually beats and tones, Hertzian. In other words, they can be measured by the vibration that they put out. And I want to propose to you that if that's true, then there is actually a harmony that occurs, okay? So now, the way I want to show you this, let's go to the whiteboard. And what we're going to do here is, okay, so short version, let's just keep our circle here. Let's say that this is 0, right? This is 0. Okay, that's definitely not a 0. Like a flat or something. Okay, this is 0, but this is also 360. We'll worry about that in a minute. But the premise is in that process of it being 0, one full revolution over 1 second is a hertz. Okay? And so we know that if something revolves in less than a second, then it's going to be a hertz divided by some number. Let's just for now say it's divided by 2 or whatever. Okay? So the whole idea here is that you have these tones, right? And in those tones, you have a rise and fall of a frequency. Okay? If we have some sort of countertone, then they will cancel each other out. And we're going to get to that. But the premise is that this looks like this sorry, looks like this. Okay, in a wave. But what's interesting is there's little intervals of, like, say, for example, fifths that are inside of these waves. So if we have this full oscillation and we say we have fifths, okay, you see they're actually inside of this thing. So from this point to this point is a certain amount of time, or a certain amount of length of time that the tone is played. But within that, there are these little harmonies. These little harmonies. Okay? Now, the reason why this is important is because what? We have, let's say that we start here and we go to here, and this is just a tone. Well, the harmony of that tone is here, and the harmony of that tone is here. In other words, as long as it's in harmony, it's somehow up with the rest. So, here's the question. Is the universe in harmony? Well, the answer to that question is a resounding yes. Everything is in harmony. And what I mean by that is that all the growth, all the changes, the circumseptane rhythms, all of the movements of the seasons, all of the changes that occur in plants, that occur in humans, that occur in rocks and minerals and stones, and the growth of crystals and the oscillation of crystals, all are in harmony. In fact, I'm going to share something rather shocking with you. The only thing not in harmony with the rest of everything else that's going on around us is us. What do I mean? I mean that the tree was given instruction to grow a certain way. Let's take a look at that. The tree was given instruction to grow a certain way. So let's talk a minute about how a tree grows. So the first thing we need to talk about is that a tree starts out very small and works its way around its own growth over time. Okay? So that's like a top view of a tree, right? Like when we cut a log, this is what we see. We see a spiral. Now, what's interesting is as that tree begins to come up out of its trunk, it does something interesting. And you can verify this by just going and taking a inclinometer, and I think that's what it's called, incline meter. Anyways, and actually measure the angle. But here's the crazy part: is that this angle from here to here will always be 137.5 degrees, and this right here will always be 137.5 degrees. Well, what's 137.5 degrees? So if this is a circle and it was divided up into 360 degrees, 360 degrees, one moment. 360 degrees times the golden ratio, 1.618, is 137.5. Now, why is that important? Because the trees are actually being obedient to this music, right? they're actually growing their branches at this angle, right? 137.5 degrees, right? Okay, now here's the important part. What is this other angle? 42.5. Uh-oh, didn't we hear that angle earlier today? Oh, yes, we did hear that angle earlier today, didn't we? We heard it in what? Our rainbow. That the rainbow, the droplet of water, light, at an angle of incidence off the reflective part of the water has to bounce off at 42.5 degrees in order for us to see the rainbow. You see what I'm getting at here? Trees grow at these angles. Rainbows occur at these angles. Everything around us is in harmony with the music, with the rhythms. Now, let me tell you what happened. So I'm sitting here as this smoke is coming up over me, and I'm hearing the birds chirp, and I'm hearing the crickets chirp, and I'm hearing other things like the wind blowing in the leaves. And I kid you not, it was all in sync. There was literally this moment where the smoke was not hurting me. And at that moment, all of a sudden, I could just hear everything around me, and everything around me had a rhythm and a tone. And I thought to myself, because I've been in music a long time, I thought to myself, my gosh, this is like some music. And then I thought about it some more, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is not necessarily music per se, because it's not music that I would necessarily enjoy, right? I have a certain preference for my music. But the truth is that these harmonies, these chirps, all this stuff is actually synchronized because of those numbers. And I don't know how to explain this to you, but the wind actually blows in a golden ratio sequence. I will show you what I mean in a minute. Let's jump back to the board here real quick. Let's go over here, and I'm just going to show you really quick how to draw this spiral. So this spiral is basically going to be two squares in its simplicity, and they will have a half circle in them. The next square is double that amount. So the way I want you to think about it is there's actually 4 squares here next to those first 2, okay? And then that arc will cut through the middle of it. And then we have 3 by 3, right? That arc will cut through it. And then we have 5 by 5, and that arc will cut through it. And what's my point? My point is this is actually the pattern in which the wind moves. And somehow the wind, okay, the wind is blowing on this tree. It's got these leaves all over it. And I can hear the wind hitting the leaves. And here's a bird over here. Oh, this is going to be a funky looking bird. Here's a bird over here, right? Chirping. In sync with the wind. And here's a cricket down here. Oh yeah, this is a great cricket. Okay, down here chirping because he's in the shade and it's got a kind of a cloudy day, chirping with the bird, which is consequently when the leaves are rustling, doing that. Well, consequently, you need to know that this is that 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 13, right? 21, 34, 55. That's as far as I'll go for Fibonacci. Sequence, comma, 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 comma. Okay? Which consequently is the 1.618. Now, it's not exactly that, It's a little bit off. In fact, when you get to, oh, and I forgot 8. I'm putting it in there real quick. When you get to 8, it's pretty close to 1.618, which consequently is the 137.5 and the 42.5, which consequently also has to do with what the birds are doing. What's my point here? My point here is that the natural order of the universe is in operation of these numbers and this information in such a way that it is in harmony. Now, in terms of tone, when you have a tone that is within a fifth of another tone, it's harmonic. But if it is in any other number, a sixth, a second, it will not be in harmony. It will be disharmonic. And disharmonic music is produced by people with long hair and electric guitars. And so the way that I want you to think about this is disharmonic music is uncomfortable to the soul. But none of this is disharmonic. You don't get them. They will not operate out of sync. The tree grows in the spiral. The tree grows in those angles. The flower petals operate off of the 1, 2, 3, 5, 8. You will not find a flower petal that is outside of that sequence, unless one of the petals has fallen off. And so, what does that mean? That means that there is a signature in everything around us. Now, earlier, I talked about lightning. Now, what you need to know about lightning is that lightning has created, as a result of the amount of energy and vibration as it hits the earth, has created a vibration in the earth. That vibration is called the Schumann resonance. And if you follow the octaves of the Schumann resonance, you'll find that they are in a lot of things. For example, in structural engineering, can be the moment of inertia in a beam or in some sort of structure. In other words, there's a certain amount of vibration that can occur before damage occurs from an earthquake. In fact, we found that earthquakes actually have a vibration very close to that Schumann resonance. Now, why is this important? Because your body also has a tendency to have these things going on. For example, when we talk about 1.618, what's interesting is that there's a ratio of 1 to 1.6 in almost everything in your body. You have from this finger to this finger is actually 1 plus 1.6. This point from here to here is 1 plus 1.6. This point from here to here is 1 plus 1.6. Same is true of your face. In fact, when people's faces are disproportionate, we find them to quote unquote be ugly, because their face does not follow the spiral. Everything in the universe that has been created is actually in sync with this number and these ratios. You see a sunflower and its spiral, that actually has a counter spiral as well, but you see a sunflower and its spiral, it is Fibonacci, but it is also the golden ratio. It is this spiral. Why? What is happening to the universe that it is so in sync with everything? Our bodies, our organs, the height that we are from the top of the bottom of our neck to our waistline and down to our feet is 1 plus 1.6. Artists know this because this is how they make people look realistic, or make faces look realistic, or hands look realistic in their training. And an interesting is that when you actually close your fist like this, you make the Fibonacci spiral because of that 1 to 1.6.68. Now, it's very important for you to understand the reason why I'm telling you this is because it is an oscillation. And if it is an oscillation, then it is creating a vibration. And if it's creating a vibration, then there's a synchronization with it. And everything around us, including our own bodies, are synchronized to it. And because we are synchronized to it, that means that our bodies were designed to do something very specific, right? So when we get into nutrition and we get into metabolism and we get into the operation of the organs in the body, we have something called homeostasis, right? We also have hydrostatic equilibrium. It's what keeps us balanced, right? And all of it has to do with this perfect alignment with these ratios and angles and numbers. Now, the reason why this is so important is because what you need to realize is that the feast days are lined up just the same way. Okay? And the way that I want you to think about this is that when we're dealing with information, you need to know that when we're dealing with an oscillation of 1 hertz, the 49th octave or the 49th degree of 1 hertz is where our light spectrum begins and we are able to see. And I want to remind you that the word light means a strong mind. And I want to remind you that the word see is to be able to what? Receive that information, right? The light coming in. So if light's coming in, then the strong mind's coming in, which means what? There's either A, a natural tendency towards a strong mind, or B, there is a supernatural influence upon the mind to be strong, or both. And what you're going to find out is that it is actually both. Okay, so now the next element that we need to get into is this concept of Sabbath, all right? So if we have the 49th octave actually giving us the light, then the way I want you to think about this is that we count 7 Sabbaths, and on that 7th Sabbath, we count 1 day, and that's Pentecost, the number 50. Okay? Remember, all the light is happening on the 49th octave of a hertz. Okay? And so this times, or this to the 49th degree. So if it was 2 to the 49th, then it would be 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. I'm not going to say that out to 49. Anyways, the reason why this is important is because what I want you to understand is that everything that pertains to our reality conforms to this information. Now, you show me a Christian holiday that is properly connected to those realities. Okay? So let's take, for example, if we do Lent. Okay? Lent is 40 days, not 50. Now we say, well, Yeshua ascended on a 40th day, so there might be some significance there because we don't want to just throw Lent out because it's Catholic, because it's a Christian practice, and for whatever reason, it's attached to Christ, okay? But what we want to do is see if it can sync up. So we don't necessarily have a 40 in our process, right? But we do have the 50, which is the 49 plus 1, okay? Now, I know that that's a stretch because you're like, well, wait a minute, you're just adding 1 to 49. But remember one other important thing. It's instructed, okay? And every single last thing that's happening in the universe, whether it be the orbit of the Earth around the sun and its perfect position in terms of the frequency of orbits and its necessity to be just right environmentally for us, plays a huge role in how you need to be thinking here. Because what you need to be thinking about is that everything that is in its natural process, its natural order process, is actually obeying instruction. And so the way that I want you to think about this is that if that's true, then number one, that proves that there's an authority who gave it instruction. There's a governor who makes sure that it obeys the instruction, and it what? It is enabled. Okay? You say, well, what do we have? Well, that's going to be something really important that we need to talk about, because so far what we've been talking about is hertz. Okay. Now, there is a science out there, and I need to put, I know that some of you are going to be like, ooh, that just flew over my head. But there's a science out there that I need to explain, because that science is actually going to end up being something important in our information. So let's go to the board real quick. On the board itself, I'm going to put a Cartesian system. Rene Descartes came up with it. He is pretty skilled in what he does. Now what I want to do is I want to go ahead and draw in a Hertzian system. What do I mean by Hertzian? I want to draw in an oscillation. Okay? So we have it starting here. We have it dipping down below zero. Let me see if I can make it a little bit more proportionate to our stuff here. So we'll at least have it come down all the way here and then come back up like that. Okay? Now, phase has to do with where you're located on the zero over time. Okay? So if I start an oscillation at this point right here, right? And I start another oscillation of that same frequency at this point here, then we have places where that frequency interacts with the other frequency, and they somehow cancel each other out. Well, what's interesting is that if you were to actually look at this in terms of degrees and say that this is that, or say that this is 0 and that this starts at, say, 90 and this drops down to minus 90 in degrees, then if we were to say that wave was 180 degrees out of phase, it would become what we call a standing wave. Which consequently cannot be traced. It cannot be, this is the part that's very important. It can't be traced. And since it can't be traced and it can't be detected and it can't be measured, it doesn't exist. Doesn't that sound like the same philosophy of the evolutionists who don't believe in God? If it can't be traced and it can't be measured, then it doesn't exist. Well, consequently, what's interesting is the actual energy that exists here is potential energy, which means what? It's an energy that enables energy to move, okay? So recently, I was involved in a project that had to do with the design of a catapult. And the principle behind the catapult is you pull the arm down and you hook the arm. At the moment that it's not moving, it has the potential to move. That's potential energy. And however much the torsion stress is here, and however much the strength of the material is there, is actually how much kinetic energy is going to be spent. And so the reason why this is important is because before I release the catapult, it's in a state of potential energy. When I activate it, it not only is in a state of kinetic energy, but it also has its own force and is creating a very different situation. It's flying through the air, and so it's creating air friction. It's moving, and eventually it's going to impact on its stop bar. And when it impacts on its stop bar, that impact is actually the full force of the kinetic energy in acceleration because of its mass. Now, the reason why that's important is because the way I want you to think about this is that potential energy is actually what enables you. Now, there's something very powerful about this energy. It's called scalar energy, and I'm not going to get too much into it today. But what I want you to understand, is that when two different things start at different times, if they are perfectly out of phase, I'm going to show you what that looks like. I'm going to show you what being perfectly out of phase is. So if I'm starting, let's put my circle here so you can see this is the 360 degrees. And I am starting my cycle here. See, let me switch this over the board. I'm starting my cycle here. Then you need to understand that what's happening is that I am actually going to move up first, right? So let's look at this. We start at 0 and we move up, and then we come back down, right? Something like that. Let's draw that a little bit differently. So we're starting at 0, we're going up to 90, and then we're dropping down at 180 degrees, and then we're coming back like this right here, okay? In fact, let me show you the full, instead of doing a half one at the 180 degrees, let's do it like this. So we're going to start at 0, we're going to go up to 90, we're going to come back down past 0 again, which is what, the 180 degrees, we're going to come around, and then we're going to come back up and we're going to stop there. Okay, and so this would kind of be our timeline. And in terms of this, if this was done over 1 second, then that would be the phase of the wave. Now, why is this important? Because if I put another wave starting at the same frequency, so it's going to have the same heights here, but I start it earlier or later, something happens. This is going to go up and come down at the same time. Sorry, that's a horrible illustration, but you can see it looks something like this. Then that's where the scalar energy occurs. Well, let me share something with you. What is actually being produced as that lightning strikes is something called scalar energy. Now, what's important about this is that scalar energy does not diminish. So let me show you what I mean by that, okay? Bear with me on this because I know this is a bunch of smarts, right? This is a bunch of smarts. But remember that rule of correspondence. Let me tell you what Paul said. They are without excuse because that which has been made, remember our harmonies, our music, everything I've taught you, that which has been made shows what? The invisible attributes of God, the divine nature of God, and the eternal power of God. Which means we should be able to find those three things in the information of that which has been made. So now all of a sudden we have scalar energy. So let's talk a minute now about the concept of entropy or the simplicity of entropy, which is the law of thermodynamics. But the principle is that the law of energy conservation says it cannot be created nor destroyed, only transferred. Okay, so in that principle, when we start out with a vibration, okay, it is going to get less and less and less and less and less and less and less until an infinitely small number that we cannot necessarily identify. That's the wrong infinity symbol right there, okay? So the premise is that that's normally how a vibration occurs. Now, the reason for that is because a vibration is actually going to, over time, transfer into sound and heat and other energies, kinetic energy, etc. So what? It's going to slow down. Okay. Let me show you what happens in non-Hertzian scalar energy. In non-Hertzian scalar energy, a vibration begins. Remember, it's non-Hertzian, so you can't detect it as if it's a sound, okay? Non-Hertzian is actually going to what? Keep its momentum, keep its frequency, and not wear out. Now, why is that so important? Because there's only one thing in the universe that doesn't wear out. And if you haven't realized yet what that is, after all this time that I've been teaching you, it's the intensification of all power in the universe. It does not diminish, right? It does not diminish. And so if there was actually a detector that could detect an energy that does not actually reduce in its magnitude over the vector of time, then it would have to be something supernatural. It would have to be something outside of the realm of our understanding of physics. Well, guess what? That energy is actually the energy that enables you to accomplish what you need to accomplish. Now, here's the part that's really interesting about this. When we're working with that type of a model, that it does not diminish in its ability, something interesting occurs. Number one, it goes out in all directions perfectly. All right. So that means it does not, it does in no way, shape, or form does it actually, it's not resisted. In fact, they have done experiments where they detected scalar energy, that's a hard word to say there, but they were able to identify that scalar energy was present between an outside point and an inside point of a concrete wall. And that potential energy was able to be acted upon even though there was a wall there. Ooh, that sounds familiar. Now, here's the interesting thing about it. When we start to get into this thought process, the way I want you to think about it is in terms of the idea that if you try to do something, it's this. But if you do something that you've been instructed to do, you don't try to do it, you do it. And one of the reasons you do it is because you're enabled. Another reason you do it is because the authority told you to. But here's the intrigue, and this is important, is when Yeshua said, therefore, is the Son of Man Lord of the Sabbath? He was saying the Son of Man is Lord of the cycles. But what was he really saying there? He was saying that we are actually the authority. That's not really, when I think of authority, the first thing I think about is speed limit signs. And that's because I like to zoom. But the premise is that there is something giving instruction to a system, and that system is obeying those instructions, and those instructions are evidence and proof of the authority. But that also means that it is enabled, and what's enabling it is the potential energy. Okay? And so the way that I want you to think about this is, number one, when you get all tingly, when you're having a spiritual experience and you get all tingly, that is your body interpreting that energy into something that you can actually detect, which is beautiful about this. The reason why I showed you the reason why I showed you that craziness, which is a horrible illustration because it's out of scale and everything. But the reason why I showed it to you is to show you that if two waves of the same frequency are out of phase 180 degrees, this energy is present. Which means what? We can reverse engineer it and detect it with what? Hertzian That's why you feel vibration. Maybe you're praying for somebody and you feel vibration. I promise you, that's not the energy. That's your body interpreting this energy. Now, there's a couple things that are very important here. But what I want to do, and I really try to master this, but I'm not perfect at it, is I want to illustrate for you this energy. So the first thing I want you to think about is if we have a plane, okay, and let me illustrate for you. There is a Cartesian coordinate system here that we're working with, okay? And we have a plane in that realm. We also have a plane, or we have an axis coming this way, right? So then if we were looking at this in terms of 3D space, if we have a plane like this, in fact, let me draw the plane in a different color. Okay, just to illustrate this better. So let's start with red. Okay, and I know you guys don't like red, but let's go ahead and get it in here. So that's not supposed to do that. It's a mid pin. All right, here we go. And so here is this plane. So in terms of that, if we say that this is the y axis, this is the x-axis, and this is the z-axis, then we could say that this plane is in terms of yz, okay? yz, all right? And then we have another plane, which we will do in blue, and it is in this direction. We would say that that plane is in terms of x and z. Wait. Okay. Now you watch this. This is actually going to be pretty amazing. X and z. Okay, so we have an xy plane. We have a yz plane and xz plane, and then we have another plane, which we'll do in a different color. And that one is actually going to be, oops, I did it again. Me and my pens, huh? Okay, this one is actually going to be in this dimension. And so the way that I want you to think about this is that there's a plane on each one of the axes. And so this is going to be x, this is going to be xy. Okay, now the reason why this is important is because in the origin point, which I'm going to use this for the origin point, coming out in every direction perfectly. Let's see, let's use a different color. Let's use this green here. Coming out in every direction, I did it again. Coming out in every direction perfectly. Okay, without interference, because it passes through matter, is this energy perfectly in every plane of existence, every plane. Okay, and so the way I want you to think about it is that this energy is actually omnipresent. So if this energy is omnipresent, which means it is superpositioned everywhere, and it is non-Hertzian, it's not detectable, so it's not a result of some vibration or frequency or something else, and it is not stoppable, and it doesn't wear down, what will really blow your mind is where you and lightning have a relationship. Because a human being vibrates in synchronization, just like the birds singing, just like the Fibonacci sequence, all that. It does it in synchronization with it. A human being is in synchronization with the lightning. Now, we have proven I shouldn't say we, scientists have proven that lightning in its movement through the ionosphere to the earth is actually evidencing scalar energy. Now, where's that important? Well, guess what? This is actually what Tesla called the ether. And he says that light is sound acting upon the ether. Lightning is moving along ether. You see why he had such a mastery of electricity? He understood the potential energy that this is actually occurring. But what's interesting is when it hits the earth and all the billions of lightning strikes on the earth hit the earth, they energize the earth at around 7.83 hertz. Well, it just so happens that the human body, the brain waves and the other waves that are being produced at the frequency of 7.83 hertz. What does that mean? That means that something has given us instruction to resonate with lightning. Whoa, right? But here's the crazy part. What we do is we actually create our own cycles. And the way that I want to put this to you is that it has somewhat to do with nutrition. It has somewhat to do with exposure to certain things. It has somewhat to do with our attitude, and it has somewhat to do with our belief system. Now, the reason why this is relevant is because what I want you to know is that this right here is actually the drawing of a human body. Most of you who have had some sort of medical experience know the separation planes of the human body, right? So there's a separation plane this way, there's a separation plane this way, and there is a separation plane this way. In other words, that energy is originating from inside of you outward without any interference, right? It goes through walls, goes through metal, all these places where we have been able to identify that this energy goes actually originates from within you and from within the tree and from within the bird and from within the other things around us. We have been able to identify that it is actually coming outward from you up to about 6 feet. There's an interesting number you should remember from COVID, up to about 6 feet. And as you come into contact, and what I'm talking about is the waves, the scientifically detectable waves that are coming out from you are evidence of this energy. Now, there's a stretch there, and there's a lot of critics who will say that that's not true. But what I want you to realize is that it's coming out from you because you are a temple of it. That's right. This potential energy that we're talking about that's omnipresent is actually the wave field of the prescribed path. So why is this important? Because that means that we ourselves can create certain oscillations, and we ourselves can align with certain cycles. So is there a cycle right now in existence that appears to be out of synchronization with everything else? Yes, there is. I'm not going to tell you what they are today, because you're going to have to learn how to get into the cycles. But what you need to know is that when you are not in sync with them, these right here are not in sync with you. What does that mean? That means you are out of harmony with the universe, with the entire created universe. You are out of harmony with it. As you move through time in your processes and your decision making and all of the things, you are out of harmony with it. It has given instruction. This energy has given instruction to everything around it to vibrate at a certain frequency, to be in harmony with a certain frequency. And like I said, when you take the 49th octave, that's where we start to see. That's light. When you take different octaves, that's where you start to hear that sound. But that is all Hertzian. And so what you need to realize is that's all operating upon this predetermined energy, which actually is why you're alive. Now, what's interesting is when we get into Cancer, Cancer has information in it that it chooses to disobey, okay? Now, I want to talk a minute about the concept of systems, okay? So I'm going to jump over here real quick. And all I'm going to do is this, I'm going to type in system definition, okay? Now, the reason why I'm doing this is because I want you to be able to do it. A group of interacting, interrelated, or independent elements forming a complex whole. An organism as a whole, especially with regard to its vital processes or functions. A group of physiologically or anatomically related organs or parts. So, what is the most simplest system? The simplest system is an intelligent being with an instruction. And that intelligent being chooses whether or not to be obedient to that instruction. And as it chooses to be obedient to that instruction, you will find that it actually thrives. Okay? It actually thrives. What's the intrigue of Cancer? What does it do to its host? Kills it, right? When it metastasizes and it spreads throughout the bloodstream, past the lymph nodes, you're done. That's it. You got days, maybe hours. Cancer is a cell that is disobedient to the instruction. Cancer is a cell that is disobedient to what? These. You will not find this sequence in Cancer. You will not find this growth system in Cancer. And the intrigue is that the cell itself that's being disobedient to the instruction still has the instruction. They have found in cancer cells the DNA information that told that cell to do what it was doing. It was supposed to be a pancreas, or it was supposed to be a leg, or it was supposed to be a bone, it was supposed to be an eyeball. And it did not obey that instruction. And so as we start to get into the context or the concept of disobedience, we need to start to examine what exactly is it that we are doing. We are actually actioning the potential energy in violation of the instruction. We are using the power of the intensification of all power in the universe to violate his instruction. You have no idea the astronomical magnitude of this context, because it proves the necessity for a Savior. Yes, amen. But it also activates something absolutely amazing within this whole context, and that is that the only intensification of all power in the universe, intelligent enough to create something that's in violation of harmony, is us, which is where we can identify as Satan, where Yeshua tells Peter get thee behind me, Satan. He doesn't tell Satan to come out of him, right? He doesn't say, get out of him, right? Go into outer darkness. He says, get thee behind me. Why? Because at that moment he was in disharmonic process with what was actually supposed to be going on. Now, here's the intrigue. What you don't realize is as we create those cycles. So I want you to think about this, okay? Here's how we'll do it. This is what we're going to do. This will be good. All right. So on the one side, we have this cycle, right? And what does it say? It says, well, let's call it Shemitah. Well, that's an interesting color. Let's not use that color. Let's use this color. Shemitah, which is what? Okay, that looks like a Z. Shemitah, which is what? The 7-year cycle. 7 years. All right, and over here we have another cycle. Okay, and that cycle says, okay, non-Shemitah. Okay. And that concept or that context is basically that we're not going to rest the land every 7 years. So let's say that we just work the land until it's dead, and let's say that we just say that that's 10 years. Okay? And so what do we have? We have a frequency in which the instruction tells us that we are supposed to activate that rest upon the land for the Shemitah. It's a cycle that happens every 7 years. It starts at 0. So right under here, I'm going to put that wave just kind of sort of how it would appear. Okay. Let me see. Let me do this illustration part real quick here. We'll just do this line. We will put 3 dots. I think that's a pretty good thing because of the context, which I will show you in a minute. I'm going to put 3 dots, 1, 2, and 3, and then let's do this in blue. And we're going to go from 0 up and then down and then back to 0. Okay, so that's the Shemitah cycle. All right, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come along and I'm going to say, okay, we've got 10 years. So from point A to point B. So we'll go ahead and write that in here real quick because I think it's going to be very important here in a minute. We're going to call this A and we'll call this B. And so what we're going to do is we're going to come along here and we are going to put in, can't use red. Let's use this color right here. Okay. And so what we're going to do now is this red line is the timeline of 7 years, right? But really we need 10 years. So let's say that the 7th year is somewhere there. So let's go through real quick and fix this error that I have going on. Okay. Oops, not that part, just this part. Oh, now it's not wanting to delete. Okay. So I'm just going to leave that. Yeah, 1 dot there. But the way that we're going to look at this is that from here to here to here is our 7-year period. So we'll go ahead and we'll illustrate our line again here. All right, and so here's our whole 7-year period. Now you know that within that there are year to year to year feast days, which we could say are harmonies of that same system. Right? Okay. Now we have a 10-year period in which we basically just worked the land to death. Right? So we had a rise and fall of good increase and whatnot, and it is what it is. But now what we're doing is going to come along And we're going to illustrate this in this way, and we're going to say, okay, so what we need here is we need this dot here, we need this dot here, we need this dot here, and now we need to come along with a different color, which I think I will just use light green. And we're going to, of course, start at 0, yes, but look what's happening. Okay, and so the way that I want you to think about this is anything where these cross cancel each other out, cause damage to the system. This is cancer. This is the concept of cancer. This is how frequencies of cancer work. Okay, so the premise is that there's an obedient system. There's a system being obedient to the instruction. Remember, the simplest system is one instruction, right? So we're obedient to system. When we're disobedient to system, let's add something in there. Let's add the disharmony of non-feast days. It's harmonious with what? It's harmonious with that 10-year cycle in its own way. But look what that just did to the rest of it, right? And here's the crazy part about it. We are the only entity that light is obedient to. Let's talk about that for a second. Remember I said the 49th octave of Hertzian of measurable Hertzian oscillations is light. The 49th octave is where light begins and we start to see light. Okay, there's infrared and there's ultraviolet, and that's kind of where the 49th octave begins. But once we get above the 49th octave, that's where we start to see light. Now here's the part that's important. The way I want you to think about this is that concept of seeing light on the 49th octave is the result of an oscillation that naturally occurs. Okay, and so when we are working with the idea of canceling something out, when we were working with the idea of trying to eliminate a disease or something like that, we work on trying to identify where its natural resonance is. And just like when you break a wine glass with a opera singer, we actually cause that to vibrate in such a way that it disintegrates. Okay. The premise is that we ourselves are called the light of the world by Yeshua. Now, what's important is I want you to remember that the people who were listening to Yeshua's sermon walked away saying, this man is not like our teachers. He's like one of what? Authority, right? So they didn't know who he was, which means they were non-believers. They didn't believe in Jesus Christ, right? But yet he says to them, you are the light of the world. Right? You are the light of the world. And so the premise is that when we start to talk about light in terms of strong mind, or if we talk about light in terms of photon emission as a result of heat energy, that's the only way light occurs, is heat energy. Then we start to talk about the idea that something can actually be created that is actually contrary to the system. How do we know? Cancer. Cancer is proof. Remember, that which has been made. Cancer is proof of a Satan. But that Satan has to have the magnitudinal power of the intensification of all power in the universe, or at least have a way to tap into that. So now here's the interesting part of this. The way I want you to think about this is that we have the ability to tap into that potential energy. My proof is in the workers of the dark arts, people who practice witchcraft or Satanism and perform rituals. That power is not coming from the dark side. That power is coming from that same potential energy that everybody has an opportunity to use, but only one group has been given the power to control. Who? The observer in the double slit experiment. Light and particle spin is obedient to humans only. They have used other detectors. They've used robots. They've used cats. They've used all kinds. In fact, cat was a big part of this. They've used all kinds of things to try to get it to act. So it's either a wave or it's a particle, right? They've tried to get it to act a certain way by not observing it and by putting something else as the observer, and they haven't been able to do it. The only thing that is obedient is, or the only thing that it's obedient to is us. And so here's the intrigue. You actually have command of the light. You have command of the cycles. You have command of the Shabbat. Be careful, because if you create a counter frequency like Sunday to the Shabbat, and you are out of sync with the Shabbat, there are areas where it's going to cancel out, which means what? Your blessing cancels out? Yes, of course. That's a simple one. Why? Because Torah says in Deuteronomy 28 that only those who are obedient will receive these things. Well, what if we look at that in terms of energy? In terms of energy, if you create your own cycle, you create your own frequencies, your own hertz, 440, and do something along those lines to try to manipulate the system, you're still using the power that was afforded you because of your father, Adam. You are a son of man, right? And if you are a son of man, or you were an offspring of Adam, then you have inherited these things. Then you need to understand that if you have created your own cycles, you have created your own frequencies. And if you've created your own frequencies, God knows what's going to grow. And I promise you that has to do with the solids in your body, kidney stones, cancer, blood clots, etc. I can prove that with any one of the energy healing systems that are out there that deal with frequency, that have been suppressed by, say, the ADA or somebody, or the AMA, Royal Raymond Rife. But the premise is that what we need to understand is that we are fluid. And we are supposed to flow with the harmony of nature and the naturalness. Now, if you understood the ramifications here, for example, if you were to identify that every single economic problem that we've had in America has corresponded to the Shemitah, and you would understand that it has become a judgment and not a blessing, and therefore it is a cycle of a curse. Every 7 years, America suffers a serious economic collapse. And we go into these recessions and we go into these problems. In fact, 2001, 9/11 was the beginning of a new Shemitah. I don't have to tell you what happened on that day. And I'm not trying to sit here and say that we have caused all these problems, but in a way we actually have, because we have decided to just be other gods. When it says you shall have no other God before me, you need to understand it's talking about you. Psalm chapter 82 says you are a God. Yeshua in John chapter 10 says you are a God, an Elohim. What's an Elohim? A vessel of reception. Here's an interesting thing that you need to know. I want you to think about this. An Elohim is simply a vessel of reception that has activated the spark of light that has gone out in every direction to the limitations of that Elohim. Remember, it can't achieve any further than its limitation. That's a given, but there's our scalar energy again. Because this is a sphere. And what you need to realize is, as a vessel, this is important, as a vessel of the Holy Spirit, or a temple or tent, as Peter called it, you need to understand that energy within you that you can't detect. listen, I'm going to put this out here and I'm going to be very gentle with it. But the people who think that they can detect the energy that I'm talking about within the body have issues. This is about faith. And I will help you understand this in its simplicity. Is it something that you can tap into only with your will? But I promise you that as we do this, we either do it in synchronicity with this beautiful orchestral music that's being played in the universe that is very, 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 very slow tempo and very, very, very low frequency. 7.8 hertz cannot be heard. You cannot hear the Schumann resonance. And I can tell you there's actually a bandwidth of 7.83 hertz, which goes down to like 4.6 hertz. So it gets even lower. And then it goes higher. It can I think it can get up to like 10 or something like that. I can't remember. But the point is, and that same kind of thing is happening in our body. It's dynamic. None of this is static. You need to know that. But what you need to know is that you are Lord of the Sabbath. You're Lord of the cycles. But you also need to know that it is disharmonious with everything else when you come up with your own. When you establish your own cycle, like they did at the Treaty of Milan, you have created your own frequencies, and that is another God. Why? And here's the important part. We have been taught in Christianity that God is way outside here. And yet the kingdom of heaven is within you, Yeshua says. Which means what? The throne of God is here. And if the throne of God is here, then we need to understand what God actually is an energy of influence upon the part of us that wants to create our own frequencies. Every time you create your own frequency, you become disharmonious with everything else around you that was created because it's being obedient. The trees are being obedient. The animals are being obedient. The rocks, the minerals. I could not believe it when I found out that a crystal grows in a Fibonacci sequence, but also grows in obedience to the golden ratio, those angles that I was talking about. And here's the interesting thing about it. Well, I'm not just talking about quartz. I'm talking about almost every mineral does this, the way it grows, which consequently has something to do also with the water cycle. Because those minerals didn't grow until water was inhabiting the spot where they were at. That's inside of itself is interesting, especially when we get into the water molecule itself and those measurements. But the premise is, in all of this, is that when it said, you shall have no other gods before me, he wasn't talking about some statue that Nebuchadnezzar set up. That's a whole other dereliction. Now, you take the 8 billion people in the world coming up with their own frequencies, and what do we have? We have a worldwide system of cancer. And of course, it's going to manifest as solids. Because really, I'm not talking about cancer itself. All cancer is. You need to understand, the word cancer itself doesn't exist. It's not some specific disease. It's a specific way in which a cell works, okay? And so a cell is cancerous, but the word cancer itself doesn't exist. But the premise is that when something is cancerous, it is disobeying the what? The harmony of the rest of the body, but it's also disobeying the instruction. Now, the reason why this is so important is because as we humans continue to create our own cycles and cancel each other out, not only are we careening towards destruction, because we are totally disharmonious and disunified in that function, we've also created a system of belief, of dependence that is basically the result of somebody believing that they need to somehow preserve themselves above everybody else. And you think that that's not a God. And so it is very, very important for you to understand 3 very significant things. Number 1 is that if you were instructed, you are enabled, and therefore, if you are enabled, you are an authority. And if you are an authority, then that means that that energy is going to be obedient to you. And I'm going to just put out there that that energy is obedient to you, even though that it is the intensification of all power in the universe, because that's what he subjected himself to in the humility of that death on the cross. It says that he left the throne. Now, I need you to understand, I do not believe that Yeshua was any more of a deity than we are. But you need to understand also that it was Torah, a force of benefit that manifested in the flesh and tabernacled among us, which is a reference not only to his birth, but to the fact that it is the feast days that are at the core of the cycle. And that Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles, which are the prescribed feasts, are the points of incidence of those cycles. So when we are working with this system, we need to understand there are different rules. For example, buoyancy does not apply. Now, granted, you would need to understand a lot about that energy before you could actually walk on water. Yeshua had to understand that first. And I promise you, the Torah contains it somehow. And so therefore, that was a direct, for lack of better words, that was a direct physical emanation from the Torah. And therefore, he had that knowledge. I'll give it that. But he had to be capable of sin because he wasn't always tempted and didn't sin. He had to be capable of us. He had to be capable of our quote unquote failures. Now, what is absolutely important here is for you to understand that this music that we listen to, this music that we create, is because the law, what I'll call the law of ceremony. We have been trying to be these Elohim for so long. We are trying to create frequencies and make them harmonious. Pythagoras strangled and drowned one of his followers because they were demanding that music have a certain mathematics to it, and he couldn't stand it because it was an irrational number. Because Pythagoras needed the harmonies to be the way that they were supposed to be. But the interesting thing about it is that we haven't done any better. We're now here in the 21st century, and we still have not fixed music. See, you don't know this because you just go and listen to a song and enjoy it. But the people who understand music theory know that music is broken. Why is it broken? Well, I would propose that there's three reasons. Number one, our concert pitch is not in alignment with the Schumann resonance, which consequently is the correct frequency that we should be tuning things to, which consequently 432 hertz is actually a octave of the Schumann resonance. But then I also want to propose to you one other thing, and that is that we actually are not using the correct mathematics to try to identify it, because we're not applying a multiplier like maybe 1.618. I don't know. Furthermore, and this is an important one, humanity at large is not interested in Torah. So I propose to you that we've been trying to make our own frequencies. I propose to you that why they're pleasant to the ear is because they're still harmonious. It's just they're not harmonious with creation itself. There is a huge tuning fork in the universe vibrating right now. And that huge tuning fork in the universe is vibrating at these numbers, at these ratios, at these angles. that nature itself is obedient. Now, even a water droplet and a light ray at the right angle, not any angle we determine, but at the one angle that is correct, makes our eyes see a rainbow. And I can tell you that's because everything is following the instructions but us. And I propose to you that the instructions are all around us. If we didn't have Torah, we would still know how to do this, because part of it has to do with the harmonious interaction of that toroidal energy shape that we are already producing. When they put the pads on your body and detect those things, or on your head when detect those things, they've already discovered that that's outside the body, that those waves are way out here and detectable. So what is happening when a human walks up to a human? Well, two very important things that need to know is, number one, there's information contained in all of that. There's information there because it's a system, and systems contain information, and they contain feedback. And when feedback is introduced into a system, that means the instruction has come back around again to the system in such a way that it gives new information to the system, that system adapts. Now, the reason why that's important is because I am messing with your system today. What you thought you understood about God is very, very different, isn't it? Because now we understand that Elohim are just these spheres of scalar energy, or of equilibrium vectored energy, right? Which means that's what we are. And it explains why the psalmist would say, "You are all Elohim." But also and that means that there's Elohim actually in between the planets, controlling the length between them, because it has to be an intelligent being obeying instruction. A tree is an intelligent being obeying instruction. A rock, a mineral, is an intelligent being obeying instruction. Better than us. And so when we are working out our life in our realities, we need to understand that it would probably behoove us to begin to try to sync up with this stuff. Perhaps maybe we begin to connect more with it. You want to tap into this human resonance in an effective way, you need to take your shoes off and get your feet on the ground. You need to get that rubber that prevents you from grounding off, and you need to go into this natural system and be in it and experience it, which is a Shabbat action, right? It's a Sabbath action, which makes sense. Now all this stuff comes together. So can I sit here and say, oh, the feast days are locked into Fibonacci and locked into these things? No, I said those are instruction. Instruction in the system itself of what? The 365 days, which consequently, just so you know, is actually a Fibonacci golden mean spiral sequence of process that the orbits themselves. So why is all this so important? Because at the microscopic level, things are being more obedient than you. Yes, of course, we could probably harp on that all day long. Change your Sabbath from Sunday to Saturday. It's a no-brainer. But if it's not, at least understand that if you have been given an instruction, whether it be in Torah, whether it be an intuition from the Father, which is the higher self. How do we know? What is that reality? That reality is an emanation of the intensification of all power in the universe. Remember the 750,000 volts coming down and being dummied down? You're the dummy down, Yahweh. You're the dummy down, Yahweh. Okay? So the higher self, the higher being, the Holy Spirit within you is actually trying to guide you in a certain direction. Even Calvinists admit that. But the premise is that they don't understand that that is the Father. The Father is the instructor. And so when we have an intuition and we move obedient to that intuition, driving down the road, see the guy on the side of the road, and decide that we're not going to help him when our gut is dragging us into that situation, that's another God before him that is creating our own cycle. And here's the interesting thing about it is there's a point in time in that geometry that I was talking about where we have I know it's probably not all that great of an illustration, but you see the mess here is actually geometrical. And what's interesting is the geometry of the waves when you put them into when you put them into vectors and angles, diverge. These waves diverge from each other, which means we get more and more separated from each other. We were given an instruction of social justice and harmonious information that has been turned into the enemy of Christianity by Christianity as a result of a desire to separate themselves from the one people who could identify the truth about their Bible itself. When Council of Nicaea sits there and says, we will put Easter here because we don't want to be a part of what the Jews are doing, and then the Council of Laodicea says, we don't want anybody in our religion to be idle on the seventh day like the Jews are. And then Council of Trent says, hey, we're the ones who changed the day of the Lord. We're the ones who said it was Sunday. Why are you being obedient to that when you know that we're the ones that changed it? And Martin Luther did not respond because he also didn't like the people who were saying that it was supposed to be on the Sabbath. Or, it was supposed to be on Saturday. That's disharmonious. And not only is it disharmonious, but the cycles that were created as a result of that resulted in some serious darkness, the Crusades, and resulted in some serious darkness in the monarchies, and some serious darkness in the power of the Pope. Because the Pope didn't have to write a Torah scroll like David did. And the Pope, if the Pope did write a Torah scroll, he'd be like Solomon, who changed that one yod that said he cannot take many wives. He got rid of that one yod, which is why Yeshua says not one yod or tittle will pass from the Torah until all is fulfilled. And so you need to understand that at the core of this thing is a manipulation, but what you also need to understand is there's ramifications of these frequencies that we've created. Choices that we have made to create our own vibrations. We have the power to do it. I've been trying to tell you this all along. But what I didn't know is that there's already a system out there that is obedient to the instruction and that we could come into harmony with. And if we did, that we would have a very, very different reality. Perhaps the reality that Yeshua had, I don't know. But what I do know is that you need to stop thinking your God is out there and realize you are the Father. The problem is that you are disobedient to yourself. And you are the Son. See, that's the part that people cannot get their minds wrapped around the idea that when you are operating in these paradigms, there are frequencies that are occurring that are canceling each other out, canceling out your blessings, canceling out your protection, canceling out your instruction. And so at the core of this thing is an understanding that first and foremost, I'm just going to put it out there, God is music. If you haven't figured out by now that these numbers are proof of design, and if proof of design, then are proof of an energy that we don't understand. And all of this stuff that's going on in nature is proof of something we don't understand, but that we also are. Then we need to also understand that maybe we don't understand how all this works. Because when he sets all this stuff in motion, it's harmonious. It's harmonious. So the first thing that you need to know is whether you've been given an instruction or whether you've been given intuition. And when I say instruction, I mean Torah. So therefore shall a man leave his mother and father, or don't take the mother and the eggs. There's an enabling behind that concept, but you need to know there's also a reciprocation and reward behind it. And so that's the Torah. And then the other one is the intuition. Pull over on the side of the road and help the guy. And I didn't say that, do that every time. Don't get yourself murdered because Rabbi Q told you to go pull over on the side of the road. You follow that intuition, okay? But what's important for you to understand, and this is imperative, is that if you don't, you are actually creating a different path, different frequency, but you are using the power of that scalar energy, of that energy that is God, that is omnipresent, that is the enabling of obedience to instruction. Watch this now. This is crazy. Romans chapter 8, verse 4. That the righteous requirements of the law will be fulfilled on us who do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the scalar energy, the Holy Spirit. The Spirit, who do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. The righteous requirements of the law. What is that? Torah. Obedience to Torah is what? Enabled by what? The energy that's omnipresent, that is not detectable. Is not detectable by human means, but exists as a result of Hertzian frequencies. Which means what? There is a reason why the music is playing in the first place. All of it, your heartbeat, your brainwaves are all music. And there's a reason why they're playing. There's a reason why they are creating a certain reality. There's a reason why it's the 49th octave where you start seeing light, which is just sound acting on scalar energy. That's what Tesla said. It's what Einstein agreed with Tesla on. But why is that? I mean, he didn't agree with each other. Their theories agreed with each other. Well, why is that? Because just like there is ceremony in ancient times where people are practicing the same thing, believing the same thing, having the same pantheon, having the same sacrifices, the same stuff going on, is because they were trying to create. They were trying to be Elohim. They were trying to do this thing. That's why we make music. We're trying to be what we were created to be. It's just we were never supposed to be using instruments to do it. We were just supposed to be synchronized with the rest of the harmony of things. And one of your harmonies you need to tap into is that 7-day cycle on the right day. And you need to tap into that 7-month cycle on the right day. And you need to tap into that 7-year cycle on the right day. And you need to tap into what is the result of those 7 years. Count to 49 plus 1, and all of a sudden you have light in Hertzian science. Count to 49 plus 1, and you have the complete deliverance of Israel. Count to 49 plus 1, and you have the betrothal of the bride of the universe. Right? The bride mentioned in Revelation chapter 19, verse 7 and 8. Who what? Who has made herself ready and robed herself with what? The righteous acts of the saints? No, the righteous requirements of the law from Romans chapter 8, which consequently you're enabled to do because of that energy. So now we need to ask, what instructions have you been given that you are enabled to do that makes you an authority in, which is your purpose as an Elohim, to govern a system? What system? You see, the way this works is you walk into a room and you need to realize you're the only one with this knowledge, which means what? Everybody in that room can benefit from what? From your energy, but also from the fact that you walking in that room and you're the Elohim. No one else in there is the Elohim because they're caught up in their wounds, limiting beliefs, and entitlements. They're not there to make the situation better than you found it. Go back and watch my Tikkun Olam video and realize if you are invited to a Bible study, I'm just saying, don't expect to learn something. Don't expect to go into that situation with the idea that you are somehow going to benefit from it. Don't get me wrong, you will. But you need to realize that you're going there to elevate those people. And if proper elevation occurs and enough people actually want to change, then the paradigm of cancer in the entire universe is going to change. Because entities that are disobedient to instruction are cancer. Entities that are disobedient to their natural order processes are cancer, which means what? What does cancer do? Cancer eats without checking to see if there's enough food for everybody. Cancer grows without checking to see if there's room for it. And cancer spreads. I'm sorry, that's the grows without. So it eats, it grows, and it also disobeys instruction. It disobeys the DNA. The cell is given instruction from the DNA, and that DNA is disobedient, and it absolutely does its own thing. And it uses the stem cell part of the cell. It uses the potential cellular makeup to create a mass, a solid that vibrates at a very, very low frequency. Solids vibrate at low frequencies. Now, granted, it's not a low frequency in terms of how high of a frequency it vibrates at, because Rife was having to do he was having to use light frequencies to attack cancer. But what I want you to understand is it's a lower frequency than the rest of the body, the rest of the cells. Because consequently, you need to know that your cellular makeup is vibrating at a very high frequency, and when it steps into a certain frequency, it's in a state of disease. So all this is awesome, and all this is great, but in the end, I want you to think about what we need to fix here. Because the only reason you're an Elohim is because something needs fixed. But what you need to understand is instead of fixing it, we're breaking it. So we need to come back into harmony with Fibonacci. We need to, and by the way, just Fibonacci, just so you know, is again a discovery. It was not invented by I can't remember the guy's name. His last name was Bonacci, and everybody called him Fibonacci. It was not discovered by, or it was not invented by him. It was discovered by him. E equals mc squared was not invented by Einstein. It was discovered by him. The double slit experiment was not invented by someone. It was discovered. The placebo effect is not an invention. It's a discovery. It's already in existence as a system. Now, I can tell you, if you play the game of the system of the Elohim who are disobedient, you're going to be, experience, and get cancer-style returns, including maybe cancer itself. And I'm not saying that every single human being who's gotten cancer as a result of them being disobedient, but hey, I would look at the book if I was you, because that's what the book says. Right? We have people who take sugar pills and get better from their cancer than the people who take the oncology drug that was created by GlaxoSmithKline, I believe it was, or somebody, that basically is a reduction in certain cellular processes in cancer. So it's basically slows it down, getting completely better from their cancer, even though they took a sugar pill because they believed that they were going to get better as a result of that medication. That's the placebo effect. That's somebody believing. Believe you me, that was the moving of that potential energy into some other kind of energy, which consequently then becomes detectable. So, you know, at the core of this thing is, I'm just telling you, you're absolutely out of order. And I don't care if you've been, I don't care if you've been, I've been, I am out of order. Okay. I don't care if you've been Torah observant. I don't care if you're a Christian. I don't care if you're an atheist. You're out of order. We are completely out of sync with the sky, with the earth, and with the nature around us. And in that process of exploitation of those things, we're doing even worse of an injustice. Don't get me wrong. I'm not some environmentalist that's wanting to go hug some trees, because let me tell you, I like a log cabin. But I will tell you that at the same time, there is a disharmony with that system. Okay? I'm not necessarily saying it's the logging industry. I'm saying that right now we are out of sync with the music. It's like when you go to church and there's that person and everybody's like, oh, yeah, 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 yeah. And that person's going, oh, yeah, 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 yeah. And you're like, stop, right? That is how this is right now. That's how this world is. That's how you are. We need to resynchronize. And I don't completely even know how that happens. But I know in the moment that I was sitting in front of that campfire and that smoke came up in my face, the rules were not applying to me. And it was to show me the rest of the synchronization. I don't know if it was some sort of sensory deprivation or what, but I can tell you, I did not cough. It did not burn my eyes. It was all up in my face, and all I could hear was the birds and the wind blowing in the trees, and I was blown away because I can hear beats, and I can hear harmonies, and I can hear tones like nobody else, and very, very, very good at the music process and music theory and all that. But I can tell you, man, I was like, oh my gosh, I've never heard it before. And I just realized it's all synchronized. Why is it all synchronized? Because it's being obedient. Yes, amen. But it is also synchronized in with those frequencies. It is a part of the music instead of being its own music, which is what us humans have been trying to do from the beginning, is to play to make music. It's that same law of ceremony where we are trying to do something, but we don't completely understand how, because we don't want to actually listen to the instruction. It's right in front of us. And for those of you who are critical of Torah because you think it's misogynistic, you need to realize there's no protection for a man when it comes to exploitation, but there's protection for women and children. In fact, it says if the widow or the orphan cries out, there is going to be a spewing out of you out of the land. You will be removed from the land. You will be exiled from the land. It doesn't say if the man cries out. It says if the widow or orphan cries out. So for those of you who think that Torah is misogynistic or that it promotes slavery and all that other stuff, you need to readjust your brain. This is the instruction of the harmony of the universe. And when you finally tap into it, then you become Lord of it. I have no idea what's going to happen. But I can tell you, I am disharmonious and I am out of order. and I don't understand the things that I need to be seeing in the sky at night, and I don't understand how I need to be tapping into the grounding and how I need to be tapping into the natural resonance of things around me, but I know that everything else that surrounds me does. The trees do. The flowers do. And it is time for us to wake up and realize that let me reword that. And the reason I'm going to reword that is because of my final statement from it. It is time for us to arise and realize that people are waking up and starting to resynchronize. And I would propose to you that there might be a climactic event like Revelation that is the result. But I propose to you also that the only reason why the God of the universe, the intensification of the universe, would bring destruction upon humanity is if things got so disharmonious that a natural destructive interference would occur, like the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, where there is destructive interference, and that destructive interference causes an entire structure to disintegrate, or what happens with an earthquake where the frequency is not the same resonance as the building, and destructive interference occurs and the building comes down from the earthquake. You need to understand you're doing the same stuff with your thoughts, with your actions, with your words, with your choices. And it has to do also with the fact that your heart is already bent on being disobedient to the instruction from the intensification of all power in the universe, Torah, where you are eating disharmoniously. You are celebrating holidays disharmoniously. You are celebrating the wrong thing disharmoniously. You are putting emphasis on things that the Torah never gave instruction for. And for those of you who believe that Christians are appropriating Torah, yeah, we took it. We flat out took it, applied the correct information to it, and you can't have it back. Because what I have learned and gained and understood about who I am, what I am supposed to do in this universe, what I just gave you, you need to understand we have something to fix. But the only way we're going to fix it is if we come into alignment with it. If you're a Sunday morning pew sitter, if you're not in alignment with Shabbat, don't expect to be the Lord of it. And that's just an example. You need to understand, I'm talking about all kinds of harmonies here. I'm talking about that there is something that you need to hear and you need to align with. And when you hear and align with it, amazing things happen. And I don't know what that means for me or my family or for our lives, but I can tell you at the very least, the end of the cycle's teaching is simple. It's going on all around you. You need to synchronize with it. When you do, you will become Lord of it, and you are enabled to do whatever it is that you are supposed to be doing. And when I say supposed to, it's very, very important you understand that I am way, 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 way outside the realm of saying supposed to, like there's some divine plan. More along the lines that you come into alignment. Listen, the tree doesn't sit there and say, "Oh, I'm supposed to be a branch for a tire swing." That doesn't work that way. But the tree, through its process of growing, becomes an amazing opportunity for a kid to throw a tire swing on it. So I want you to understand, when we're talking about convergence, when we're talking about where harmony causes constructive interference. In other words, it amplifies, which means it will become more influential upon the corporate collective conscience of the world, which is right now cancerous. So I want you to understand, you realize that every single circumstance and every single thing that you come into, you need to leave better than you found it, and you are enabled to do that. You need to realize that your mind naturally wants to be an Elohim. Your mind naturally wants to be happy. Your mind naturally wants to be compassionate. Your mind naturally wants to be joyful. Your mind naturally wants to laugh. Your mind naturally wants to operate in harmony with the other things. The rest is Satan. The rest is Hasatan, the adversary, the thorn that causes the constant turning. What turning? The turning of the cycle of the curse. Behold, I set before you today life and death. Choose life that you might live. Right? A blessing and a curse. Choose life that you might live. Don't choose the curse. Don't choose the realm of death. Don't choose disobedience. Don't choose cancer. When I thought about the magnitude of this teaching and its ramifications, I got afraid. I got afraid that I had gotten too far out of my league. I had gotten afraid that I was not listening anymore to the intensification of all power in the universe. And I can tell you those were the answers that I was seeking up there at that campsite. I realize that when it's said and done, people try to control things because they're afraid. And I'm not going to try to control this. I don't understand it. I gave you a prayer at the beginning, and I did that for your sakes. I said that prayer for your sakes, for you to understand that I am completely surrendered to the possibility I'm wrong. But I can tell you that the problem that we have is that where people are speculative in their beliefs, we have scientific proof of reality. The problem is that we've never synchronized it with the reality of our God and of our Savior and of our spiritual condition. We've always tried to keep it separate. We've always tried to say that they are in error. We've always tried to say that they are evil, when the truth is that what they've been discovering is our God. And what they've been discovering is that our God is actually not out there, but here. And specifically, the authority of our being. And in that sense, that means that if we are given instruction from that authority, then we are enabled. He's not going to give us instruction that we can't carry out, which means Torah is still active. And if we are enabled, then we need to understand that our enemy is enabled as well. Who is our enemy? Our ego, our fears, our limiting beliefs, our wounds. That's evil, right? Remember the twisted rope in the mind, the twisted mind. That's what evil is. And so where we are contrary, where we create destructive interference, like here, that's destructive interference. Where we encounter that and we experience that, you need to understand that that's creating cancer. That's creating a intentional disobedience that's resulting in such a self-absorbed process that we don't check and see what's going on around us. We don't see the needs. We don't hear. We don't see, and we don't understand. And that's what Yahweh told Isaiah to go do, is to speak this stuff to the people until they were dull of it. They didn't want to hear it anymore. They didn't want to see it anymore. And they didn't want to understand it anymore. And that's why there were Israelite kings discovering Torah and going, oh, we need to do this feast day right now. And repenting and concluding that the only solution to the violation of it was grace. Which brings us back to, he made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, so we might become the righteousness of God. Does it give you permission to break it? No. But if you do, here's the solution. If you don't break it and you actually follow the instruction and you're harmonious with the music, who knows what will happen? Perhaps maybe we will join Peter on the water. Okay, I know this was long, and I know that there is a lot of information here, and you may need to go back and rewatch it again, but this is what I'm going to say. You need to stop believing how you were believing in order for you to start practicing what it is that you want out of life. You were taught to be subjected. Listen, here's literally Christianity in a nutshell. When you are bad, God beats you like a dog. When you are good, that reward gets stored until you die. Not the God I'm going to serve. Sorry. Not going to happen. I need a God who's understanding enough to know that I'm finite compared to him. And that means that he's not going to beat me every time that I do bad. And that he's going to give me my reward for good now. And that's what you need to realize. That's the difference between After His Heart Ministries and, say, Assemblies of God. Not trying to single out Assemblies of God. It's just the first thing that came to mind. Remember what we do. We say, we seek the correct path. If we find a path and it does not bear fruit, then we expatriate ourselves from it. No matter how sacred and holy it is, take the systematic theology book and go find the things that say that God is out here and take a big old red marker and put an X through it because it's all crap. And if we find a path and it bears fruit, then we practice it. If by practicing it, it bears fruit, then we teach it to others. That is the model of After His Heart Ministries. And I'm going to tell you right now, the way in which we think, talk, speak, do whatever is going to change. We're actually going to go back in to the Torah scroll within the next few weeks and begin from wherever the parasha is and apply this new knowledge. We're going to start over studying de novo, just like we did before, only with this new understanding. And so I want you to understand this is a pivotal point, not only in this ministry, but in your life, if you choose it to be, where you will apply a very different paradigm. Well, you will realize that the sky has something to do with you. Well, you will realize that the earth has something to do with you. Well, you realize that that tree that you make fun of people that go hug, I will go hug a tree right now and thank it for being not only obedient, but for singing the song that it sings. You get my point. And so please understand, this is a very pivotal moment for anybody who's willing to be open to it. I know it's simple. It's simple, and it almost sounds like what we were already taught. But it's not. Because what we were taught to believe is that it'll get better when we die. I'm going to tell you right now, if you wait until death for it to get better, you're going to be very disappointed with the outcome when you get to the other side. But if you start now to try to change this world to where you don't have to say it'll get better when we die, because you have decided to embrace your identity as an Elohim and therefore understand the energy that is within you that enables you. The sky's the limit on what this is. And I don't even know, right? I'm limited because I still am very doubtful and scared and a coward. But the truth is when it's said and done, stepping out in extreme faith into these things is definitely a part of this. It plays a role in this. But in the end, I want you to understand it's going to require surrender. It's going to be willing to allow the things that you thought you understood about reality, about your God, about the Bible to change. It's time for that change. It's time to to stop referencing the things that are the beliefs of those who have this destructive interference going on. It's time to stop. And I'm not talking, I am talking about a complete revolution of thought and understanding. Because in the end of this thing, what we understand of Christianity is garbage compared to what it was. It's just absolute anti-Semitic, pagan infused, and I'm not trying to dog the pagans because some of them are out there aligning with those energies. But what I am trying to say is that it's not what we thought it was, and the result is what the darkness has been of Christianity and what it's becoming in its progressivism. So that's enough said. But I just want to reiterate the fact that it is time for a change in how we operate and how we think. And so we'll go ahead and end the broadcast, say Shabbat Shalom, and we will see what happens next. We will see what the intensification of all power in the universe